How do you pick a title for a dissertation or a paper? It's actually not that trivial. Because a good title can take your paper much further, and there are many more people would be reading it. And one thing when you're in graduate school that you don't always realize is that the title is actually part of how you frame your story. So it's not just about the title, but it's also about how you present your findings, how you present your research, how you structure your research. So this is really at the core of what your work is about, who it speaks to. And this is probably getting increasingly so in a world where you have search engines and people find research based on the titles or sometimes the abstracts. So people search for relevant keywords and then they find your article. Or maybe they don't, and that's why you need a good title so you can be found. Maybe there's a limited group of people within your own small field who kind of follow what you do, or hopefully eventually they'll start following what you do. But then outside of this small group of people, it's actually quite difficult to find you. Say you work on, I don't know, welfare social groups in medieval China, and then people working on similar things within the European context, they will only find you if you present your article in a certain way. If you open up your article to these kind of engagements. And the primary way of doing so is to give it an appropriate title. And as I said earlier, the title kind of reflects the structure of your paper, how you present what you find. So rather than focusing on your research process or kind of your own trend of thought, try to think about what your research represents, how it can engage with a wider community. So instead of focusing on your particular material, sometimes it's worth flipping it around and talking about the wider issue your material illustrates or helps to revise. So you could have a title like The Analysis of Such and Such a Text from the 10th Century, and then you can even put the dates in parentheses. And that would be a very honest title because maybe that's what you do in your dissertation. But the problem is that there are probably very few people who know this text, and much fewer are those who are interested in what this text says. And who is interested in a boring analysis of something? So even though you're analyzing this text and maybe you're going through it in detail, but in reality, what's more interesting is that what this analysis tells us about something bigger, about something more interesting, about something that interests more people. So it's maybe worth to turn this around and focus on the implications. And then in your introduction and then your conclusion, you kind of bring out, you emphasize these implications. And that also gives you a new title, a much better title, which connects to wider audiences. So instead of this analysis of a little known text, you could focus on a theme of like, I don't know, imperial succession in the 10th century, or the view of an author as a creator, or I don't know, some economic issue or something related to religion. So something wider and something that more people can connect to. And then your text becomes kind of an illustration of that topic, even though your analysis is really based on that text. And this is how you pick a title, basically, because in your title, you could talk about these implications. And so your title is the thing that opens up your article. So the same way, if you were going to write something more popular, you wouldn't really focus on what you did on a certain day. Say, I went to grandma's place and then my uncle was there and we had this interesting talk. And then we played with the dog and did all these different kind of things. But you would focus on the theme that connects all these things. So you could begin your story about the event, like why you went there. You could begin by saying this was grandma's 80th birthday party. And that gives a much better perspective on what was going on and the details that you went there and there was a dog and there were 3 cats and maybe there was even an iguana somewhere. These things are interesting, but they're kind of hanging on by themselves. And without a framework that connects all of them together, they're kind of like a string of events or items in a list. And so you want to avoid that. You want to bring everything under a sort of a master narrative. And when you give a title for something like this, you would also choose to focus on grandma's 80th birthday party, rather than the dog and the cakes and the strudels and whatnot. But it's also important to realize that this is not always the case, which is true about everything most of the time. So sometimes it's worth including the particular in the title And this is in cases when the object or the event or something that you analyze, that you study, is very well known. So say if you write about the Mona Lisa, it would make little sense to exclude that from the title and talk about this change in the status of women in Renaissance Italy. Because that's an interesting question, but the Mona Lisa is so widely known, it's such an iconic thing that you want to include that, because through that you can connect to a much wider discourse, both in scholarship and in sort of like popular culture as well. You don't have to shy away from this. So the similar way, if you write about the Diamond Sutra from Dunhuang, which is the first dated complete printed book in the world, well, you want to include a reference to that object in the title. Rather than talking about an otherwise very interesting thing, say the beginnings of woodblock printing in China or in the world, you also want to retain this topic, the Dunhuang Diamond Sutra, because again, it's so iconic, it's so widely known, that you want to use that. You want to include that in branding your paper. So to summarize what I've said so far, because maybe it's a little bit rambling, generally the important thing is that you frame your paper or dissertation in a way that it kind of includes the implications. Why does it matter for more than 10 or 15 people who are otherwise interested in similar material? So the title and also the introduction and your conclusion want to open up your article. And so I think it's a good idea if your title actually connects to your introduction rather than the whole of the paper, because it's your introduction that frames your study, or it's supposed to do that anyway. And the exception from this is when you have cases when the object or the text or whatever the topic that you research is so important, so iconic, that people automatically connect to it. They recognize it. And in these cases, it makes perfect sense to include that in the title. And before closing, I have to say that I have not always been following this advice either, partly because I was simply not aware of this, because nobody told me. So when I started publishing academic articles, I didn't really know about it. It's only after talking to students and trying to fix their papers and trying to see what the problem with their titles are that you start reflecting on this and start understanding what kind of makes more sense. Okay, so I'm actually really interested in what you think about this or what your experience has been. So please write in the comment section below and subscribe to the channel. And thank you for watching and hope to see you next time.